While this sounds simple and obvious, the fact is that the data does not back this up. Ideas like range advantage and pushing your equity are largely a myth, and in this video, I'm going to show you why. My biggest gripe with the GTO community and poker coaching at large is just the lack of scientific rigor, and I don't really blame any one coach. Like, I'm myself very responsible for this. What's actually happening here is that people are just kind of like looking at a solver and then just making up explanations as they go without ever really checking their assumptions rigorously, I mean. I think it's pertinent to put out a quick warning about correlations. You see, there's a common saying in statistics that correlation does not equal causation. So just because two things are related does not mean that one is causing the other. A famous example of this, if you take a look at this chart on the right, are the number of drownings and ice cream deaths in Spain. And you'll notice that if you graph this by month, they seem highly correlated, right? Does this mean that ice cream is causing people to drown? No, that's stupid. So what's happening here is that even though these two things are correlated, they're both being caused by some third underlying factor, namely the fact that it's summer. The same is happening with equity realization and c-betting. They're both increased by some underlying factors, right? You're not betting more because you have higher EQR. You don't have higher EQR necessarily because you're betting more. They're correlated, but they're both being caused by underlying factors. Now, those underlying factors are hard to quantify, but here's my best take. How well you can convert your raw equity advantage into chips largely reflects how freely you can attack your opponent. I still think that metrics such as your entire range's equity realization, expected value, or equity are far too coarse to fully explain c-betting frequency. However, there are several underlying factors that do incentivize fast playing. So first of all, you might think about the retention your hand has after you bet. So after you bet, how much value can you still get out of your opponent on future streets? This is a really important question to ask. We saw on the monotone board that your retention plummets after you bet, whereas on the tripled board, you still have great retention after you bet. Another question is polarization. So we saw in the toy game example that just because you have 99% equity doesn't mean you necessarily want to bet, right? So it's not just about how much equity you have, it's about the distribution of your equity. By the river, are you going to be nuts or nothing, or are you going to have a bluff catcher? That's a really important question to ask. And finally, I like to consider fold equity, not just how often will my opponent fold, but how much value did those folds have against my hand? So there are various underlying factors that incentivize fast playing, and hopefully it brought you to a new way of thinking about c-betting and betting in general.